I'm currently working on a set of pieces that revolve around a single limitation that I've set for myself, which is I'm only going to use a single melodic theme. This is a pretty common question that I also receive, which is how do I repeat things but still vary them enough that it doesn't become repetitive or boring? And I think this is a great exercise in showing other ways to go about that rather than changing the theme or the melody itself. A lot of times I think we come up with a really strong melodic idea and then we try to ornament it or do variations with that melody that actually end up weakening it rather than making it more interesting. So if you have a really strong melody, that's the starting point. That's the core idea that we're going to use as a building block for everything else. Then we can look to other things like the chords that are changing underneath it, how quickly those chords change. That's something called harmonic rhythm, which we'll talk about, and how changing just one or two chords in a progression underneath a melody can completely transform the way that melody sounds without changing the melody itself at all. So my melodic idea is really simple. So we're sort of revolving around D minor here, and we could do something that you're probably pretty familiar with, and that's just put a simple chord progression, functional chord progression, underneath that melody. That works fine. Let's play with the harmonic rhythm, which is simply how quickly the harmonies or the chords change underneath the melody, and see if that can lead to something more interesting. So if I put the whole thing over a D minor chord, that would be a very slow harmonic rhythm. I could go to the other extreme and do a very fast harmonic rhythm where the chord changes, say, every quarter note. So in that case, I'm just taking some second inversion triads, which kind of makes the triad feel less stable. So they're really good for moving chromatically. And I'm just moving up and down the chromatic scale, which is just where we go through every half step, and finding chords that I like the sound of against my melody. So we could be as angular, we could be as non-functional as we wanted to be there, even though our melodic idea is certainly centered around D minor. So how do I use that in context? Well, maybe the first time we could have this very slow harmonic rhythm underneath that melodic idea. I'm just respelling the chords underneath, spreading them out. So basically, if I take a triad and I redistribute the notes, say if I took the E and put it up here, it's still a C major chord. I've just changed the order of the notes. It's not an inversion because the C is still in the bass. An inversion would have us take the bottom note and put it on top so that the E would become the bass note. I'm getting a little into the weeds. If you want to learn more about that, I have a whole ebook on harmony and one on composition as well. I'll include both of those for you in the description of this video. They're free. You can download them at your own leisure. They go into more detail and give more musical examples of exactly what I'm talking about in this case. So if I take those redistributed chords, revoice them, and use them like my pad underneath, I could have something like this the first time, and then the second time I could implement that faster harmonic rhythm that we came up with the kind of chromatic movement. Let's see how that might work in application. Anytime I swap out one chord for another underneath the same melodic idea, I'm doing what is called a reharmonization. You may have heard it a substitute change if you're a jazz player. You may have heard them called borrowed chords if you're more familiar with functional theory. And in classical theory, a borrowed chord is actually a chord that falls outside of the key signature. When I did this chromatic thing and I had these kind of angular chords, like that B major in the left hand against this D minor idea, we would consider it borrowed from another key, which kind of makes it feel like it doesn't belong, which is another issue that I have with that terminology, but it's the common terminology, so we'll roll with it. So this reharmonization is just a very powerful way to completely change the mood of this idea from the first iteration to the second. So I feel like this sounded pretty hopeful. Whereas this one sounds a little bit more restless, a little bit more mysterious and unsettling. Now, I could take that simple example that I did at the very beginning and just change one chord, and that could totally change the way the whole progression sounds. What if I change the second and the third chords? Now, I still haven't touched the melody itself. It's still the exact same melody, and that provides a through line for the listener and for us so that we always feel tethered, like we know where we are. I think it's a pretty strong melody. I feel like I can remember this idea. One of the tests that I have for myself is if I walk away from the piano after I've composed it, if I'm still humming it hours later, that's a good sign. Just by changing these chords underneath, the harmonies underneath, we can make it feel hopeful, we can make it feel sorrowful, we can make it feel mysterious. It's all about trial and error, and what I'm specifically listening for are how the chords, and when I change the chords, how that interacts with the notes of the melody, because all of that is your harmony. The melody and the harmony are not two separate things. They work together. When I change the chords, it changes the melody, even though I haven't actually changed the notes of the melody at all. So in that case, I'm just using arpeggios in the left hand. I mean, arpeggios are just chords, right? So I could figure that out vertically in blocked chords. And then just arpeggiate it. I've also changed the harmonic rhythm a little bit again, so that the chords are moving at different times than they were before. Whereas before, so it feels like it's in a different meter at this point, maybe like 6/8 or something. The only way to figure all of this out and come up with all of these ideas is through improvising, through playing around with it, through experimentation. It's another question that I get a lot is, how do you figure this stuff out? Well, you have to spend some time figuring it out. There's really no shortcut to it. But when you have some of these tools in your tool bag, you kind of know some places to start. And that's all we're really looking for is like, okay, I know some things that I could try. And from there, I'll experiment with expanding those ideas in ways that I maybe haven't in the past. One other thing I'd like to touch on, we talked about how these are called borrowed chords in traditional theory. When we get into non-functional harmony, which doesn't follow the same formulaic approach of like 5 goes to 1, 4 goes to 1, 4 goes to 5, that kind of thing, we have to use our ears more. And my composition teacher used to use a term that I prefer called harmonic freshness. And I really feel that. I experience that. That word makes a lot of sense to me in this context. Because when I do have a chord change like this, those chords, I feel each one of them as a total shift in color. And that's really what I'm looking for. I'm looking for chords that are surprising but not forced and don't feel too jarring in the context that I want them to be in, unless that's my intention. It's all about intent. And again, the balancing act there can only be found through experimentation and therefore the development of our own taste when we've experimented with enough things to choose from. So as we explore these concepts that are dealing with non-functional harmony, even though the melody is fairly tame, it's important to remember there's no hierarchy of chords. There's no this goes to that formula involved. It's really all about using our ears, and the way we get there is through listening to lots of things that use these kinds of harmonic languages, and then just getting in the sandbox and experimenting, playing around with these ideas ourselves. Hopefully this video has given you a few actionable ideas that you can take and immediately start to use in your own compositions.